Uterus is a muscular beer-shaped organ present in the pelvis, between the urinary bladder and the rectum. It can be divided into three parts: the fundus, body, and cervix. Histologically, the fundus and the body have similar structure, but the cervix is different. Function: uterus receives the right and left uterine fallopian tubes. Also, it received the fertilized ovum and nourishes the embryo and fetus throughout development. Structure of fundus and body: the wall is relatively thick and is formed of three layers. Internal lining or mucosa is called endometrium. The middle muscular layer forms the myometrium, and the external layer is referred to as perimetrium. Endometrium: before puberty and at menopause, the endometrium is simple cuboidal with a scanty stroma and rudimentary tubular glands. During the reproductive years, the endometrium is formed of connective tissue corium covered with simple columnar, partially ciliated epithelium. It contains simple coiled tubular glands called endometrial glands. The endometrium is formed of a thick superficial functional layer that shed in menstruation and a thin, deep basal layer responsible for regeneration. Myometrium: it forms a thick coat of bundles of smooth muscle fibers separated by thin strands of connective tissue, poorly delineated into three layers: inner, middle, and outer layers. Inner or stratum submucosum, consisting of longitudinal and circular smooth muscle fibers. Middle or stratum vasculaire: it is a thick middle layer richly vascularized. The muscle fibers show no regularity in arrangement, may run longitudinally, obliquely, circularly, and may be transversely. Outer or stratum subserosum, consisting mainly of longitudinal muscle fibers. Perimetrium is made of loose connective tissue covered with mesothelium. Cervix of the uterus: its wall consists chiefly of dense connective tissue and elastic fibers. It differs in structure from the structure of the uterus. Structure of the cervix: it has two surfaces. Endometrial surface, endocervix, is lined by columnar, partially ciliated epithelium, and the vaginal surface, facing the vagina, is covered with stratified squamous, non-keratinized epithelium rich in glycogen. Transformation zone at the junction between the two surfaces is the site for development of cervical cancer and various cysts as a result of occlusion of the ducts of mucosal glands. Cervical mucosa contains no spiral arteries. The mucosal glands are branched tubulo-alveolar. The mucosa of the cervix does not take part in the cyclic changes of the body of the uterus during menstrual cycle, but there is only changes in the secretory activity, from thin alkaline fluid at the mid-menstrual cycle to more thick and viscous fluid after ovulation. During pregnancy, the secretion is semi-solid, forming a mucus plug which prevents the passage of sperms, microorganisms, and other materials from entering the uterus from the vagina. Myometrium of the cervix is made of inner circular and outer longitudinal muscle layers. Endometrial blood supply. Branches of the uterine artery penetrate the myometrium to its middle and give arcuate arteries that run circumferentially in the myometrium and supply the superficial layers of the myometrium and give the radial arteries that supply the endometrium. At the junction of the myometrium and endometrium, two sets of arteries arise from the radial branches to supply the endometrium. Straight arteries supply the stratum basale or the basal layer, and highly coiled spiral arteries supply the functional layer. They provide complex network of capillaries and dilated vascular structures called lacunae. Endometrial changes during the menstrual cycle. Endometrium undergoes a continuous changes during menstrual cycle by the action of ovarian hormones, estrogen and progesterone, under the stimulus of the anterior pituitary, follicle-stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone. The duration of the menstrual cycle is 28 days. It consists of menstrual or destructive phase from day 1 to day 5. It begins 2 weeks after ovulation. In the absence of pregnancy, the corpus luteum ceases functioning. There is drop in the level of progesterone and estrogen, resulting in intermittent constriction of the spiral arteries, which causes ischemia and subsequent necrosis of the functional layer. Rupture of the arteries follows, and the bleeding occurs, with complete shedding of the functional zone of the endometrium, leaving the basal zone. Follicular or proliferative or estrogenic phase from the 5th day to 14th day. It corresponds to maturation of the ovarian follicle up to the time of ovulation. Follicular phase of the ovarian cycle. Endometrium regenerates and increases in thickness under the effect of estrogen secreted by mature Graafian follicle. The cells in the bases of the glands proliferate extensively and constitute both the gland and the surface epithelial lining, the endometrium. Luteal or secretory or progestational phase from the 14th day till the onset of the next bleeding. This phase starts after ovulation and depends upon progesterone secreted by the corpus luteum, luteal phase of the ovarian cycle. Uterine glands already developed by the action of estrogen and progesterone become elongated and tortuous, full of glycogen and mucoid materials. Stroma cells undergo decidual reaction. They enlarge and accumulate glycogen and lipids. Spiral arteries become more coiled. Progesterone also inhibits the contraction of the myometrium, thus helping implantation of the embryo. Later on, the corpus luteum ceases functioning if no fertilization occurs and menstrual or destructive phase begins. Fallopian tubes are a pair of muscular tubes at the upper margin of the broad ligament, extending from the ovary to the uterus. By one end, they are related to the ovaries, and by the other end, they are connected with the lumen of the uterus. Each fallopian tube is divided anatomically into 4 regions: intramural or interstitial part, which is embedded in the wall of the uterus. Then the isthmus, which is the narrow part near the uterus. The ampulla is the tortuous middle segment constituting more than half the length of the duct and is the site of fertilization. Then finally the infundibulum, which is the distal end of the tube, has many tapering processes fimbriae. Histologically, the wall of the tube consists of 3 layers: mucosa, musculosa, and serosa. Mucosa is highly folded and consists of epithelium, simple columnar partially ciliated epithelium, containing ciliated non-secretory cells and non-ciliated secretory cells called big cells for nourishment of the spermatozoa and the zygote. The epithelium is resting on lamina propria, formed of loose connective tissue containing reticular fibers, mast cells, and lymphoid cells. Musculosa is formed of ill-defined inner circular and outer longitudinal layers of smooth muscle fibers. Then serosa is formed of a layer of connective tissue lined by simple squamous epithelium. It contains blood vessels, lymphatics, and nerves.